here. Thanks for me. So some of you will recognise me from my role at the Leisure Trust, but today I think I'm really part of this group for the work that I'm doing with Sport England around whole systems change and trying to approach physical activity on a place perspective. And I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts before we invite you into our next breakout room, where we'll discuss some of the kind of whole system, whole school approaches, that kind of whole school ethos that Mark and Nathan have talked about. One of the things that we're learning over the last couple of years on this national programme with Sport England is that for me, system change is really about hope. When we talk about system change, it's a hope that things can be better in the future. We've been doing many of the same things for many years in terms of trying to tackle obesity and the physical inactivity epidemic that we have in our country. And sadly, most of that is really around inequality. We know that those who live in our poorest communities have the worst health outcomes and are the least active. And I would expect that whilst I don't know a great deal about the education sector, I would guess that educational attainment is also linked with inequality too. And the principle behind system change, or a whole school or whole system approach within a place, is that together we can tackle those inequalities and make a difference that we've never been able to make a difference before. Despite the billions of pounds that the government have spent on physical activity initiatives, the proportion of people who are inactive has remained pretty much the same, and sadly, the poorest have been worst affected. But we have a hope that together we can achieve the things that we've never been able to accomplish on our own. When I was growing up, we had a very active family. We played lots of different sports, but my mum was the taxi service, if you like, and she took us to all these different sporting events and would stand at the side and watch, or rush back to get the bit of kit we'd forgotten. And even when we were playing at the park, she would have organised the fantastic picnic and sit in the sun on a picnic blanket. And my mum wasn't very active, and to be honest, she was a bit overweight too. And in all of those moments, in all of that stuff that we did, she was a teaching assistant in her school, but she was the undesignated craft specialist. So even when PE and other stuff was going on, she'd be updating the notice boards and sorting out the craft stuff and those types of things. And I'm sure that happens in many schools. And so, at no point in her life really was that ever challenged. So when she was stood at the side watching football or running or basketball, no one ever asked her to join in. And at school, she didn't really get a chance to join in. And in fact, us as kids and my dad never really asked her to join in when we were playing sports at the park either. Well, as we got a little bit older, my mum asked us to start, if I would start running with her, and we jogged for a while up and down the local railway track through Stacksteads. And after a few months, it stopped, and we weren't sure where that had come from. But eventually, what we learned later is that my mum had been struggling with cancer for a few years. And despite all the appointments, all of her interactions with the local system, it had taken probably 5 or 6 years before a GP had said, well, if you did a bit more physical activity, it might help. Now, unfortunately for our family, that bit of good advice was too late, and we lost my mum. And I look back and I think, the system could have worked better. The athletics coach could have said to all the mums who were stood around, perhaps we could start a mums running group. Of all the GPs and all the nurses and all the doctors could have advised her about healthy lifestyle rather than just treating her illness. And the school that she worked in could have done more to engage her as a teacher and a teaching assistant to live a more active lifestyle. And it's caused me to reflect on the fact that if we were to work together as schools and as doctors, as parents, as sports clubs, as the council, as local authorities, as Sport England, as the government, if we could work together in Rossendale, we can make a difference in those types of circumstances. We can make a difference not only to the kids, but the families in which they live. And we can have less kids and less people having unnecessary health challenges and unnecessary losses and difficulties that are entirely preventable. And so the same applies within the school setting, that every touch point, every teacher, every teaching assistant, every lesson, if it's in a whole system connected approach with a real focus on well-being, we can turn the dial, we can tackle some of those inequalities. And that's the work that we're finding across the country with Sport England, that when we collaborate, as we're trying to start to do today, and then as you collaborate within your school, really led from the front by you, we can make a difference. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go into some more breakout rooms, but rather than talking about interventions, we want to invite you to just to think about and reflect on together, what could a whole school approach look like? What are some of the ingredients that would be part of a whole school approach to well-being and activity? And not only a whole school approach, but what role can the community play in your whole school approach to activity too?